Hi folks, welcome to Greg's Workshop. I'm Greg and today we're going to turn this stack of pine lumber into a bench. Let's talk about boards for a minute. There's going to be a wide selection at your local lumber yard of pine boards, various lengths, various widths. Try and plan out what you want. So this bench is going to be 54 inches long, so I got some 6-foot long boards. It's going to be 18 inches wide, so I got some 1x10s, which are actually 9.5 inches wide. We're going to be ripping these down and gluing them back together to help preserve some dimensional stability. When you're looking for boards, try and find boards that aren't too warped. You can see this one has just a little bit of curve into it, but that's okay. We'll deal with that. Sometimes you can find a board that maybe has an imperfection at the end that you can cut out, and so you can use that board and then just keep that for scrap or for another piece. I've gone through all of my boards, examined them, decided which sides will be the face, decided which end will be cut based on some knots and other imperfections. We're going to be cutting them all to length on the miter saw first, then we're going to take them all to the table saw and rip them down to width. It's best for efficiency's sake if you can group your tool use like that. Do all of your length cuts on the miter saw, then do all of your table saw cuts, then do all of your bandsaw cuts, etc., etc. So we've cut all our pieces to length. These are the legs. They're 17 3/4 inches long. The two pieces for the top are going to be 54 inches long. We're going to take these over to the table saw and get them ripped down to width. But before we do that, let's talk about the factory end on these boards. As you get them from the lumber yard, the factory end is pretty rough. That may be helpful with the glue joint, but if it's going to be an exposed end grain, you want to get that smoothed up. So go ahead and just cut another quarter, half inch off the end before you cut it to length. That way you have this nice, smooth face to work with and to show. One thing I like to do before making a cut like this is to check and make sure that this is perfectly square to the table. We're going to use this Klein angle gauge. I'm going to turn it on, zero it out, and check. 89.9. That's pretty good. It's a good idea when using the table saw to take a piece of spare wood, make a little notch, and check to make sure that it's going to give you a board that's the proper width. A clean shop is a happy shop. Every time you complete a task, stop, get out your vacuum cleaner or your broom, and clean up a little bit. That'll keep you from tracking sawdust everywhere and make the cleanup at the end of the day much easier. Next, we're going to talk about how to select and order your boards for your bench top. Each piece of wood is a little bit different. Some of them are straight, some of them are curved, some of them have a little bit of springy warp in them. You want to balance all of that out. So what we're going to do here, we have these two that came from the same board. They're a little bit springy, so we're going to turn one of them upside down. When we clamp and glue and screw the edges together, those two things will cancel each other out. This other board is much flatter, much straighter, and actually much nicer, so we're going to use that for the outside edges. I've already marked this one that's perfectly clear for the face on the outer edge. This one's going to go in the back. And when you're picking your face, you want to take note of knots, imperfections. For instance, this knot is a little bit dark. It's got a little bit of room around it that we'll need to fill in later. So I flipped the boards over now. We're going to mark for the pocket hole screws that we're going to use to secure these together until the glue dries. When you're selecting the faces, remember this is the underside, so you want to put those imperfections on the bottom or on the part that's hidden if you can. You can see this knot has quite a bit of space around it. and this nut over here as well. That's why those are going to go on the bottom. So when planning out your joinery, in this case pocket holes, you want to think about how the finished product is going to look. This is the bottom of the bench top. This is the front edge. If anything, we're going to see facing this way. That's why we want our pocket holes to go this way. So we're going to start at the back, make our marks, and then we can drill out the pocket holes. We're going to be using this Kreg K4 pocket hole jig to drill our pocket holes. It's important when you mark it out to mark it out along the top so that you can see that mark. The hole's actually going to be down here, but I can see the mark right here. We're going to be using the step drill bit by Kreg. We've set the depth properly. Now let's get to drilling. Next, we're going to be drilling pocket holes for the front and back stretchers. So these are the pieces that will run horizontally as well as vertically along the front of the bench and the back of the bench to give it lateral support. Last, we're going to drill the pocket holes for the legs. So now we have the boards for our bench top laid out. It's upside down and backwards. This is the front edge, this is the bottom face. We're going to be gluing along all these seams and screwing in with pocket holes. For glue, we're going to be using Titebond 3. I grew up on the Oregon coast. Even interior furniture got wet and glue would always fail. That's why I always use waterproof glue. I'm going to start by putting some along this back edge. To secure these boards together, we need to clamp them first. We need to clamp them in this direction as well as this direction. So we're just going to use this simple squeeze clamp by Irwin. Pull it together laterally. Then we're going to use this K-Max clamp by Kreg to keep it flat. These screws go in at an angle. If you don't have this clamp properly, it can cause the boards to shift and be off alignment. Remember how these two middle boards were bowed and we flipped them over so that the two bows would cancel each other out once they were fastened? Now that we're actually doing the fastening, we need to do quite a bit of clamping. I've got a sacrificial strip back here. This part is going to be a glue face, so it's not as big of a deal. We can dent that and it'll be fine. And then I've got my K-Max clamp here. There was about almost a 1/4 inch of play or of offset between these two. Now that it's clamped, we'll get it screwed together. And now for the final board. I have the whole piece clamped this way. I've got the clamp here to keep this steady. This piece also has a little bit of a bow in it. This time I'm starting in the middle, and then I'm going to pull the edges up to get it aligned. Next, we're going to be securing the legs together. These are also made up of 2 pieces of pine, glued and edge screwed with the pocket holes. This is the leg you just saw me screw together. You can see at the very top the joint is offset. We're going to go ahead and fix that. I've loosened up this screw. We're going to tighten up this clamp and then tighten the screw. Moment of truth. Will it hold? Well, it's certainly better. Everything's glued up. While we're waiting for the glue to dry, it's a good time to fill in the knots and the imperfections in the board. What we're going to do is take some glue, squeeze it out on a piece of cardboard, and take some sawdust that I've collected from the miter saw and mix it all together to make a paste. Looks like we need some more glue. You can always add more, you can't take it away. Now that we've made our filler paste, we can go ahead and spread it. We're just going to fill in some of these slight imperfections and surface irregularities around the knots. I'm going to be using this plastic spatula. Despite my best efforts, I made a mistake. I cut this one piece a little bit too short, and now I need to trim them all. I have the straight edge clamped here. We're going to be using the M18 rear-handled circular saw to trim this flush. I've double and triple checked to make sure that the measurements are proper and it's square. Let's get it cut. On this first pass, I didn't have my blade depth quite right. I left just a tiny little shelf along the bottom. So I went ahead and lowered my blade a little bit more and took that shelf right off. I'm going to be using that same technique to true up the edge of the bench top. I'm going to put our square on, draw a line, then measure back 1 inch and 7/16 to put our clamp bar on for our guide. Alright, I have my cut guide clamped on. I've ensured that it's exactly 1 inch and 7/16 from the line. Now let's get it cut. So this is the cut edge. You can see there's a little bit of tear out right up here. I planned it that way. I knew that was going to happen, so I cut it upside down so that the face edge, which will be the top of the bench, didn't have that tear out. The tear out's on the bottom. We can sand it, we can round it, it'll be just fine. The glue's had time to dry. It's time to attach the table legs. We're going to start by measuring in 1 inch from the edge. That's where we want the outer part of our legs. Then we're going to lay this in place and get our spacing front to back even. Got it the first time, 1 inch. So I've secured this with 2 screws, one at each end, just to hold it in place. In order to get it square, we're going to install this back stretcher board. This is what's going to give it lateral stability and also ensure that it's square. Did you spot the mistake? Forgot to put pocket holes in here. We're going to fix that by driving brads in from the other side. For the front stretcher, we're going to use this piece of 1x pine. It's nice and clear, there's no knots. I took this offcut strip, we're going to use that as a batten. I drove a screw right in the center. I have the ends secured with just random objects that are heavy enough to support it. Hold down a little pressure there so it doesn't move. Draw the curve. It's important to not put too much pressure on the After we're finished with the bandsaw, we want to sand that curve. There's a lot of saw marks. We're going to start pretty aggressive here. I'm using a 40 grit sandpaper. I'm going to use that to take off those saw marks and get it smooth, and then I'll finish up with a 120. I'll sand it down to 220 later when we paint. Alright, let's see how that board fits. Just right. We're going to get this glued and screwed here at the ends, and then we're going to put some more screws in the center to hold it in place. And here's our completed bench. How'd we do? Looks straight, looks square, it's not wobbly. You can see I inset that front stretcher about a ½ inch back from the front of the legs. Now we just need to get it sanded, painted. Last, we're going to round over the edge. We're going to take this router, I have an 1/8 inch radius roundover bit. We're going to go ahead and test it out on this piece of wood, make sure the depth is just right. A little bit high, we'll adjust it down, try again. We finished our bench. We're going to do the painting in a separate video, but for now, let me say thank you for coming along today. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so that you get notified of new videos every Saturday morning, and leave a comment. I promise I'll respond. Thanks for coming along to Greg's Workshop, and we'll see you next week.